So hello and welcome to yet another episode of TopTenz. I'm your interim host, Karl Smallwood. This is my stuffed anteater called Snoot, and today we're talking about 10 remarkable pairs of events that happened in the same place. As with all videos here on TopTenz, this one is based on a script submitted to us by a member of our writing team, that being Ian Forty, who you can follow with the links found below. Also, because I've been instructed by the higher-ups behind the scenes, I should say the words like, comment, subscribe, because me simply saying that means that all three of those things are more likely to happen. It sounds weird, but it's true, so there we go. Some people see a coincidence and believe it's a sign of something more, of divine intervention, aliens, fate, or who knows what else. They want there to be order in the chaos and to find meaning in seemingly unrelated events. Others see it as just a weird twist of luck or fate. Something uncanny that defies the odds. No matter how you choose to look at a coincidence, though, it's hard to ignore they can often be very compelling. Is there anything more behind these events that coincidentally happened in the same place at different times in history? Well, why don't you let us know in the comments, while you're liking, commenting, and subscribing. See, repeating it as well means it's also more likely to happen. Isn't psychology fun? Number 10. There were two Battles of Thermopylae. In 2006, the movie 300 came out and weird dudes online everywhere were forever changed. The movie ingrained the previously seldom discussed Battle of Thermopylae firmly in the pop culture zeitgeist. And though the film is an exaggerated version of a comic that itself was a fictionalized retelling of historical events, there is some truth to what is depicted therein. For example, there really was a Spartan king called Leonidas who, along with 299 of his bestest buddies, defended all of Greece from a Persian invasion. There are some additional details that often get left out of retelling, such as having reinforcements made up largely of slaves, and they didn't have giant monsters, and they didn't have the weird CGI drawn on abs. But the key piece of information to take away from all of this is that there really was a time in history where a small force of just 300 men managed to hold off the might of an entire opposing army, at least for a few days. And yes, while they all ultimately perished in the conflict, the damage they inflicted was largely psychological and remembered throughout history, now enshrined in movies like 300. But fast forward a couple hundred years to 1941 and there was indeed a second Battle of Thermopylae, this time between Nazis and Allied forces comprising of British, Australian and New Zealand. The Germans were attempting to invade Greece and the Allies were withdrawing, but two brigades remained at the rear to defend against the Axis invasion. A panzer division and another battle group were held back by sustained artillery fire, and though the battle was not nearly as dramatic as the original, though likely contained just as many explosions as the Zack Snyder version, many German tanks ended up being destroyed. Across Greece, Germans took heavy losses against a much smaller force of allies aided by local Greeks. Though the Germans took Greece and the entire Allied operation in Greece was considered to be a failure, their efforts made sure that the Germans paid dearly for the progress that they'd made. Much in the same way Leonidas ensured that the Persians only attained victory at a severe cost. Number 9. Both Alexander Hamilton and his son died in the same spot. Dueling isn't so popular these days, but once upon a time it was the go-to way for any gentleman worth his frilly shirt to settle a dispute. Just ask Alexander Hamilton, or his ghost, since he died in a duel. It was July 11th, 1804, when Alexander Hamilton took a bullet from Vice President Aaron Burr. Burr, not becoming president, was due in part to the machinations of Hamilton, and the men had a long history of animosity between them. The challenge was issued, and the men met on the dueling grounds near Weehawken, New Jersey. The location of the duel was grimly familiar to Hamilton, as just 3 years earlier his own son had died in the same spot, during a duel defending his father's honour. Not successfully, obviously. The elder Hamilton used the same pistol for the failed... Oh, that's just tempting fate. It's like, if there's one thing I've learned from the Final Destination movies, is that fate has a sick sense of humour. In 1801, Philip Hamilton heard a speech by a man named George Ecker that was harshly critical of his father. The younger Hamilton, being 19 and something of a hothead, took great offence. The men exchanged words and the duel was set. Hamilton's father gave his son advice about waiting for the first round of 4 to pass, not shooting until the other man had shot to make him look bad. But it was all for naught. Ecker struck Hamilton and the young man died the next day. Oh hi, Business Karl here with a word from today's sponsor, Aura. So Brad, Nisha, guys from behind the scenes, tell me more about today's sponsor as I tickle my anteater's snoot.
So today's sponsor, Aura, is a very useful service for basically getting rid of a lot of the annoyances that you can have in life.
Such as
spam calls, emails.
I hate that. I got one this morning. Like, I've had numerous TopTenz recordings interrupted by a robocall.
I think you're going to say Robocop.
I won't mind if it was robocall. I love robocall. I hate robocalls.
So are you aware of how these companies get your information?
Yes. And it's just, if your number has ever been entered anywhere online, you've ordered a pizza, you've signed up for a service, you've had a delivery from, a big box company that requires a phone number, that if you don't click or read through every single one of those bits, like terms and conditions, and you've accidentally pressed the wrong button, that number is now fair game to get sold to companies who then sell it to other companies, it gets put on a big list, and it gets put into the ether, and then you just can't sit down without someone calling you about a car accident you weren't in.
There are actual companies out there, like data brokers, people who get their finances just from selling your stuff.
Yeah, that's the opposite word there. Mine. It's my phone number. I'm a millennial. I don't talk on the phone to my mum. I don't want to talk to a guy trying to sell me insurance.
So this is why Aura is such a useful service. So what Aura does is they will contact data brokers on your behalf and ask them to remove your information, which they are legally obligated to do.
All I'm hearing here, Brad, is that I have to make less phone calls, which, again, as a millennial, sounds like a really great deal. The thing about these data brokers is that it's this whole insidious Ouroboros of just nonsense where they sell your data to others who then sell it back to them. And it's like whack-a-mole. But the thing, you're not hitting a mole, it's your own phone number.
So on top of all that, Aura also offers the customers parental controls, an antivirus service, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more.
Yeah, just the all-in-one app. Like basically just something that lets me just not have to worry about bloody robocalls calling me when I'm at work. Because this is work. This is my job. This counts as work. This anteater was written off on my taxes. So thank you to today's sponsor, Aura. You can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can go to aura.com/TopTenz to start your 2-week free trial. We have also provided the link in the description below. And before I leave the business void, guys, would you like a bonus fact that's not going to be present anywhere else in this video?
Yeah.
Okay, did you know that a guy once Britished his way out of a court trial for cowardice? And the story here is that when the Titanic sank, there was a British dandy called Cosmo Duff Gordon who was found on a lifeboat alongside a couple of other survivors. And when all was said and done, they tallied up the survivors that were on the lifeboats. They noticed that there was some space left on Cosmo Duff Gordon's lifeboat. And some rumours started circulating after this that Cosmo Duff Gordon had paid his way onto a lifeboat and that, as a result, they'd not gone and looked for survivors. And in truth, it turns out that Cosmo Duff Gordon had patiently waited his turn, got onto the boat, and that they just couldn't find any survivors because a giant ship was sinking in the dead of night. And Cosmo Duff Gordon was taken to court and accused of cowardice. And when he was asked under cross-examination, why didn't you wrest control of the lifeboat and search for more survivors? He responded in an unflappable British accent, I was comforting my wife. We had a very difficult evening, you know. And the guy cross-examined him, said no more questions, and he was let off. Thank you to today's sponsor, Aura. Number 8. Hitler made France surrender in the same train car as Germany did in World War I. So this doesn't technically count as a coincidence, it was more of a planned humiliation, but it's still weird enough to warrant mention in this list. There is a train carriage in France where on November 11th, 1918, Allied forces and Germany signed the armistice that ended World War I. It took place in a train car because all of the damage that had occurred in the town during the war made it infeasible to hold the historic event anywhere else. Jumping ahead to 1940, and the German war machine was storming across Europe. Hitler had taken France and brought a new armistice agreement to them to sign, just as they had made Germany sign the first one years earlier. For the occasion, he had the same train carriage used. It was revenge for what he had deemed a humiliation in the past, now to serve as the same for France. And just a little bonus fact here about when Hitler made his way to Paris. The French resistance weren't too pleased with Hitler coming, and they knew that one thing Hitler would want to do to show that he had taken over Paris would be to stand atop the Eiffel Tower. Because what better way to, symbolically represent that he had, captured the nation of France than by standing atop its most famous landmark. So one of the things the French resistance did when Hitler arrived is cut the cords for the elevator to the top of the Eiffel Tower, so that if Hitler wanted to go to the top for his propaganda photo shoot, he'd have to walk. Ultimately, Hitler decided not to do it when he found this out, and it's like, eat shit, Hitler. Moving on, number 7. 2 Air India flights crashed into the same mountain 16 years apart. It's hard to say how many planes have crashed in history, but if you're thinking of a commercial passenger jet airliners, it's a little easier to gauge. In 2017, that number was just under 2,000 in history. All things being equal, that is a relatively low number compared to total flights and something like car crashes, for example. And that air travel is relatively safe and crashes are relatively rare makes it even more remarkable that 2 flights from the same airline crashed into the same mountain 16 years apart.
Statistically speaking, of course, it's still the safest way to travel.
The first crash occurred in 1950 when a plane crashed into the southwestern side of Mont Blanc, taking 58 lives. In 1966, a miscommunication with flight control caused a Boeing 767 to crash in nearly the exact same spot, claiming an additional 117 lives. Number 6. Jackass cast member Ryan Dunn flipped his car in the same spot he'd later die. It's not nice that a lot of these are about death, but again, I'm going to talk about the analytics here. We know that you guys out there, you're all
weird and charming.
You're all little freaks. You all love reading and listening to these horrible stories about people dying. It's human nature to be morbidly curious. And you know what? Sure. Let's talk about Ryan Dunn dying, shall we? So, the cast of the show Jackass have all put themselves through preposterous things over the years. They've been electrocuted, bitten by many deadly creatures, beaten, shot, exploded, and then some. But despite how it sounds, it was all meant to be fun. That said, there was some tragedy along the way, notably the death of Ryan Dunn, who died in 2011. Drunk, who was drunk, got behind the wheel of his car, and he was going about 130 miles an hour when he hit a tree. He died along with a production assistant named Zachary Hartwell. Bam Margera, Dunn's best friend, pointed out afterwards that he always suspected Dunn would get into an accident sometime, and that, in fact, the 2 of them had survived one in the same place. Dunn had died 5 years earlier. According to Margera, his friend flipped the car 8 times in that incident, but they both managed to somehow walk away.
It's my best friend.
And that kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth. So let me tell you a bonus fun fact about Jackass, specifically its origins. So there is a fabled, forbidden Jackass skit that has never been aired anywhere, because everybody involved with productions, there's no way we could put this on TV. So Johnny Knoxville, largely considered to be the heart of Jackass, the guy who's he is the Jackass. Got his start writing for a couple magazines, he did gonzo journalism, much in the same vein as his hero, Hunter S. Thompson. And one of the things he pitched, which is a skit that appears early on in Jackass, but is very weirdly edited, if you go look back on it now, is the self-defense test, where he tests self-defense inventions against himself. He tases himself, he pepper sprays himself, he gets someone to use a stun gun on him. One of the things he did during that test is he shot himself with a gun, to test a bulletproof vest. And he's talked about this in interviews, and there is a video out there of it, but we can't show it here for obvious reasons, because we get demonetized all to hell. And the weirdest thing about this is that Johnny Knoxville just found it funny. And when he's been asked about it in later years, is it true you shot yourself for an article you paid $50 to make? Yeah, that was crazy. Do you know what the weird part is though? I couldn't afford a good bulletproof vest, so I bought the cheapest one they had. And he shoots it diagonally down as well. And with that context in mind, it's easy to see why almost nothing in the Jackass movies seems to faze Johnny Knoxville. That man has faced and stared down death, and he didn't blink. Moving on. Number 5. 2 women in incidents 1 year apart were buried alive in Greece. So being buried alive is probably a fear no one has until the first time they hear about it happening. And then it haunts them for the rest of their lives. It may not be a common occurrence, but it has happened in the past, and maybe a little too often over in Piraeus, Greece. The first incident reported in 2014 involved a 45-year-old woman. She was being buried in a cemetery in the town of Piraeus after being comatose for a time and dying in a private hospital. Locals, including some children playing nearby, heard her calling out after the funeral, and attempts to rescue her fell short as she died from asphyxiation. New nightmare unlocked. Later, it was reported a 49-year-old woman who had been treated for cancer was also buried after doctors thought she had passed. Her screams were heard after the funeral, so she was exhumed, but by then it was also too late. Her official cause of death was cardiac arrest, which, not surprising, yeah. And I thought this would have a happy ending.
Why would you think that?
When I first read, they were buried alive, which means they were dug up alive, right? No. Oh, Karl, sweet summer child, you know what the people want, and it's people dying. So some of the news reports seem to mix up details between both stories, and it's possible that this was reported wrongly and that this was a single incident, but the ages and details differ enough that it's just as likely that it was two separate occasions where two women died in probably what might be one of the most horrific ways imaginable, just in their own grave. And one thing you could say about that, at least it was, convenient. Number 4. Bobby Farrell of Boney M and Rasputin died on the same date in the same city. If you don't know the name Bobby Farrell, you probably know at least his voice. He was the singer for the band Boney M, most famous for their disco-era hit Rasputin. The song is about the infamous Russian mystic who was killed for sleeping with the wrong woman, and rah rah Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen. Yeah, it's stuck in my head. I personally really like Boney M's Christmas album, and it's on my Spotify playlist every Christmas. You gotta whack a bit of Boney M on. So in real life, Rasputin's death has long been the subject of much mystery and exaggeration, in particular about how he was shot and poisoned and drowned and so many other things before he finally died. What everyone agrees though is that he died on December 30th in St. Petersburg. Rasputin's death took place in 1916. Fast forward nearly 100 years to 2010, December 30th in the city of St. Petersburg, and that's when and where Bobby Farrell also passed away. He had just performed a show and complained of not feeling well. He died of heart failure in his hotel room later that evening. Number 3. Steph Curry and LeBron James were born on the same floor of the same hospital. So finally, we're not talking about people dying. Anytime you hear of famous people coming from the same place, someone will make a joke about there being something in the water. Maybe they attended the same school or the same town. It's a fun coincidence. In that same vein, you'll discover some athletes often attended the same schools. Less common though is discovering that they were born in almost the same place. Not just the same town, not just the same hospital, but the same floor of that hospital. And this is the case with basketball legends Steph Curry and LeBron James, who were both born in Akron, Ohio, just 39 months apart, in the same floor of the same hospital. Number 2. Keith Moon and Mama Cass both died at 32 in the same apartment 4 years apart. Oh, we're back to it, aren't we, folks? Just more people dying. The music world is full of weird and morbid curiosities, conspiracies and coincidences, most notably the infamous 27 Club. And for anyone unfamiliar with the term 27 Club, it's an informal term used to refer to this group of celebrities, largely pop musicians who've all died at the age of 27. It includes figures like Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, Jimi Hendrix and others. You can look it up if you're so inclined. We know there's people out there with that morbid sense of curiosity will get the better of them, so just promise to do it after this video, yeah? Actually though, another grim coincidence out there that's much more dramatic than artists simply dying at the same age, and that's the connection between Mama Cass Elliot and the Who drummer Keith Moon. So on July 29, 1974, Cass Elliot was staying in the apartment of songwriter Harry Nilsson in London, England. Nilsson was rarely there and let friends use it when they were in town. After a pair of performances, she collapsed in the apartment and died of heart failure, aged 32. Her weak heart was blamed on years of crash diets. 4 years later, Keith Moon was staying in the same apartment. Nilsson is said to have not even wanted to loan it out, now afraid that the place was cursed. Moon talked him into it. He was also 32 years old. You can probably see where this is going. Moon's body was found in the same bed where Cass had died. He had overdosed on a prescription drug called clemizole, which he was using to treat his alcoholism. Why did he keep the bed though? Because that's the thing, I didn't want to say, but why would you keep the bed? That's what gets me. I would not want to sleep in a deathbed. Number 1. A simulated attack was conducted at Pearl Harbor 10 years before the real thing. So Pearl Harbor is one of the most well-known events in American history, and it's been taught in schools, written about in books, and immortalized on film again and again. One thing that's not usually mentioned, however, is that 10 years before the infamous attack, pretty much the same thing happened in the same place, but for altogether different reasons. So in February 1932, the Second World War hadn't started yet. But with the first in the rear-view mirror and tensions on the rise everywhere else, America was preparing for anything and everything. Rear Admiral Henry Yarnall was in charge of something called Fleet Problem Number 13. This was a military drill designed to simulate an attack from an Asian enemy on Pearl Harbor. Yarnall, with 152 planes, staged an attack to take out the American airfield in Pearl Harbor, catching them unawares. He attacked Sunday morning just as the Japanese would later do in an effort to catch them off guard, because the Americans anticipated an attack from sea. They never saw the plans coming. Yarnall's forces dropped bags of flour, which were simulated bombs, and laid waste to the US base. Not a single American plane managed to get into the air before he'd finished his run. Though the attack was just a drill and Yarnall proved that Pearl Harbor was vulnerable, the military brass decided that his efforts didn't really prove anything. He attacked on a Sunday, which they basically called cheating, because, No one's going to attack on your day off during wartime. When the actual attack on Pearl Harbor happened, it followed many similar paths as Yarnall's mock attack had. Later, military officials would be absolved of culpability under the reason that the attack could never have been predicted. This gave rise to a conspiracy theory that the Japanese learned of Yarnall's fake plan and the US has since covered it up. What actually happened is the subject of much debate, and you can go argue about it in the comments. And while you're down there, leave suggestions and feedback and all that good stuff. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more like this, and yeah, I'm enjoying being the host, but man, do I get some tonal whiplash covering these things. I just did one. Like, I got my anteater out of my desk. I was like, oh, it's gonna be a fun one. Like, wild coincidences. And I was reading through the scripts, like, okay, so a bunch of people died. A couple people died. A lot of people died. Oh, that's fun. More people died. More people died.
Dead. Dead. Dead.
People died real good here. I'm enjoying the act of hosting and learning a new skill set, I should say. But yes, as I always like to say, if you enjoyed this video, go out there and have the day you all deserve. Cheers.